Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 6 of MC200. You guys have been doing great so far in the semester. I know that this class is a lot of work. It's meant to really be a foundation for getting you ready for mass communication or media writing as a profession. And so I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm very proud of the work that you're doing. I know it's a lot of work, but you guys just keep up what you're doing. Please know that in week 5, I announced a last call that you can turn in any assignment that you've missed or gotten a low grade on from the beginning of the semester through midterm, which will be Wednesday, October 14th. So be sure to turn in anything that you haven't turned in, either that you received a 0 on or you got a really low grade on it and you want to make up for that. I will be accepting those makeup assignments through Wednesday, October 14th. You guys can consider that just a little bit of grace and understanding given everything that's going on in our world. So I hope that that takes some of the pressure off for those of you who have missed assignments. And as always, please know that I'm here for one-on-ones to answer any questions by email, by phone. I'm here for you guys, so just let me know what questions you have. All right, well, for week 6, we're going to be getting into how to conduct and write interviews. So we will get started with the second half of chapter 11, and we'll go from there. Now that you have learned how to write interview questions, it's important that you now know how to conduct an actual interview. So the main thing that I will suggest to you is coming prepared. You need to be prepared when you interview someone. You can't just show up and start asking questions because you're really not going to get the content that you need. There are certain things you should always bring to an interview. You need to bring this list of questions. There's a reason that you made them. If you have very specific research that you need to refer to, like a study or a specific document that you're citing from, you may want to bring that as well, just as backup. You're going to need a pencil or pen, and preferably you're going to need multiple because that's going to be the day that, your pen stops working or you break something. And so the more pens and pencils you have, the better. I encourage you to use notebooks to write down notes as you are interviewing. And that way you can take notes that you can refer back to later. You need to have a card or some way that the person can contact you so that if they have a follow-up question or they need something from you, that they know how to get in contact with you. And you need a recording device. Remember, we should always be asking permission to record before doing so, whether that's with an audio recording or a video recording. You should tell the other person that you're recording. Don't try to do secret or hidden recordings. The other thing that you need to do in order to prepare for an interview is be on time. Consider how long it's going to take you to travel to your location, and also think about setup time. So if you say that you're going to interview someone at 1 o'clock, you really need to be showing up a little bit earlier if you have a lot of equipment, because it may be that you're interviewing someone who only has a set specific time. You need to be respectful of that. So it's better to be early than to be late. And you're going to want to take notes on your surroundings when you get there. If you arrive to the office and you notice that it's very hectic and crazy, make a note of that. If you set up in a particular office and there are things around that you could take note of to give color to your story, take notes on that as you're interviewing. Now, you want to make sure as you're interviewing someone that you're communicating on their level. You really want to match your tone, your word choice, your demeanor to the person that you're interviewing. For instance, when you're interviewing your fellow student for this peer interview on their experience being on campus or taking classes during COVID-19, you're going to be a little more casual than you would be if you were talking to President Stewart, whom you'd be more formal with. So just make sure that you're kind of matching the type of interview that they're expecting. Don't go too formal if it needs to be more casual, and don't go too casual if you have a very formal interview. You're also going to want to consider your location. You should be thinking about this when you're scheduling the interview, but once you get there, make sure that it's still what they say it is. Make sure there's very little noise, that there's enough lighting, and that you have enough privacy to be able to ask the questions that you want. You're going to want to check, double check, and then triple check your recording device to make sure that it's actually working. It's extremely frustrating, not only for you as a journalist, but your source if you start interviewing them and realize that something's not recording. So make sure that you are doing that. And then also take notes during your interview in case something happens to the recording. At least you'll have your notes as backup. While you're doing the interviews, the first thing that you really should do is make your interviewee comfortable. You need to explain the purpose, the equipment, and the type of interview that you want. So I always kind of give a very broad overview of why I chose them to interview, and then I restate that as we begin the interview. I tell them about the equipment, whether it's a recording device, and I'm just telling them that I'm recording it, and then I'll be able to listen to the tape later. Or if you're working for television, you need to explain to them where to look. You don't want them looking directly into the lens of the camera, so you need to tell them that because they might not be familiar with camera equipment. And you need to remind them that you need sound bites or interview quotes that are full sentences and that the subject should be identified instead of them using pronouns. Here's an example of a statement that I always say at the beginning of the interview. If I say, "What color is the sky?" you would answer, "The sky is blue," not just blue. It's a good reminder to them that they need to repeat my question into a full sentence so that it makes sense without my questions. Because when you're writing, you're not going to include your questions in their quote. Be sensitive with victims or families of victims. Let them know that you care, but as much as possible, try to remain neutral. That can be very difficult sometimes when dealing with emotional cases. I know that I've cried with victims before, but just be genuine and sensitive and respectful when doing that. But you also need to maintain control of the interview. Who is holding the microphone tends to give off an impression of who is in control. So you always want to be the one holding the microphone. You want to be the one to place the microphone in the correct place so that you're able to pick up sound appropriately. Think about your proxemics as well. If they're sitting, you need to sit. If they're standing, you need to stand. You need to be at a good distance. And especially during COVID-19, you need to be 6 feet apart. So consider all of the layout of where you are in space to be able to do that appropriately. Make sure you're controlling your tone. Don't get sarcastic. Don't roll your eyes. It can be hard to do if you're interviewing someone that you don't agree with, but you need to be neutral even in the ways that you were interviewing people. And then you need to maintain control of your questions. A lot of times people will try to answer their own question and they don't really answer your question. This is especially true with PR professionals. And so you need to continue to ask them the right questions so that you get the answers you need. Don't let them sidestep you. Active listening is an important part of interviewing. Active listening doesn't mean you're just hearing someone. It means you're listening to the words that they're saying and having a true conversation with them. And so you want to maintain eye contact with them, talk to them like they're a normal person. You're having a conversation. If they say something that's really interesting that isn't on your sheet of questions, ask a follow-up question. "Oh, I heard you say this. Can you explain that in further detail?" You can ask them to explain something that might not be clear on the first time, or you can ask them for a definition of what they mean. Especially with newer non-media trained interview subjects, it's important that you ask them to rephrase something. Sometimes a person will give a 2-minute answer when all you can use is 30 seconds. It's okay for you to say, "Would you be able to restate that in a little more concise way for television?" It's okay to say that as long as you're doing it respectfully. So don't be afraid of uncomfortable silences or pauses either. Sit in that silence because silence makes people nervous. You get nervous just with me pausing, and sometimes people will try to fill the space of that silence with something that's not really rehearsed, and those are usually some of the best quotes and sound bites that you can get. When you're writing for print during an interview, make sure you're taking notes about the person's appearance, their tone, their surroundings, and emotions. So, those can be things that you refer back to when you're writing your piece. If you're in broadcasting, you still need to take notes. You can even use time codes for important quotes. So, like, write down the time that's on the camera when someone says something important. And as always, make sure in broadcasting that you're checking your recording and your audio quite frequently. Once the interview is over, you want to thank your interviewee. You should do that both in person and maybe even with a follow-up email afterwards. Let them know when and where it will be published if you know. And if you don't know, try to get back to them when it is. With some pieces, it's appropriate to encourage them to share the piece on social media. Remember, this will help you build your brand as a journalist by getting a social media following. But of course, if you're doing an investigative piece on that person, you might not want to encourage them to share it. Just go with the appropriateness of that. Make sure you review your notes after the interview, review your recording, and start picking out some of the most important quotes as you're doing the transcript and verbatim of the interview. You're going to want to piece together the rest of your story using your research, your quotes, finding balance with other interviews, and make sure you're matching it to your video for TV or your photos for print. It's always important to go back and get clarification when necessary. So, if you've interviewed someone first and then the second person that you interview accuses them of something, but that first person didn't really get a chance to talk about that, you need to follow up with that person. Ask for clarification, ask for rebuttals. It's okay to go back to a person more than once, just don't take advantage of their time. So, once you're done with the interview and you've kind of looked for quotes, there are certain things that you need to think about when deciding what quote to use. The quote needs to serve some type of purpose. And typically, the purpose of an interview, as we've discussed before, is to bring out emotion, opinion, or expert facts. You want to use quotes that are full sentences, ones that identify the subject, that are clear within the writing, but you don't want to choose quotes that you could just summarize, right? So you don't want to use an interview quote saying the sky is blue. That's just a general known fact, and you can write that as an objective journalist. So avoid using the straight facts. Instead, search for those quotes that use emotions, opinions, and expert facts because you can't really use those from your own writing. Try to get quotes that are conversational. You're going to want to avoid jargon or technical language. This is especially true when interviewing officials. You want to pick quotes that makes sense in short form. So you don't want these long paragraph quotes. You want 1 to 2 sentence quotes maximum. And make sure you don't include yourself or the questions you asked when you're picking the quotes. Their answer needs to stand alone. So if you're looking at this partial transcript on the right from an NBC News interview with President Trump, you'll see I went through and looked at his quotes. We wouldn't pull a quote from Trump that just had him say right, or even what I did is I was going to fire. My decision, it was not. Like, that doesn't make sense standing by itself. So the only quote that could be used here is this top one. And even that quote uses a pronoun instead of the person that we're actually talking about. So I'd have to write around that quote and introduce the subject of that sentence in my writing as a journalist. So even the quote that I picked isn't the best one, but it's the best out of what we have. So here's another example. If I interviewed Sally Smith, the director of student life, about how small the new resident dorms are in this new dorm building, her first quote, the new dorm will house 36 students in apartment style units, it's really just a straight fact. You could write that as a journalist and still remain unbiased and objective. Her second quote, I think students will love the layout, said Sally Smith, the director of student life, who is already planning to help students reduce clutter in their individual units by placing a communal Christmas tree in the lobby. This is okay, but it doesn't really stand very well on its own, right? And this add-on sentence that we as the writer included seems to come out of nowhere. However, her last quote actually is the best one to use. Living on campus gets real cozy real quick, Sally Smith, director of student life at Elizabeth Mott University, says. By December, students can barely fit tiny Christmas trees in their units. Now, I would mark off barely. There's some descriptive language in there that I would probably take out as an editor. But here's her last quote. So we're going to put a Godzilla tree in the lobby, she said. So you can see that this one is a little more interesting. It adds a lot more color. We have opinion. We have a little bit of emotion. So you can see the difference in the types of quotes that we pick out here. Now, when you're writing to quotes, you're going to want to avoid cliche transitions like, when asked about such and such, so and so said, because that's what journalists in a 1940s movie do. It's not really how we as journalists actually write. So instead, you're going to want to paraphrase facts unless you're attributing them to something that can't be verified, such as Senator Jones says the bill should be passed by Monday. We could not write that by ourselves. We really need to attribute that fact to the speaker, since we wouldn't be able to verify that fact by ourselves. It's something that Senator Jones is predicting. So we want the quotes to tell the opinions or the emotions so we can be neutral. It's one of the main objectives of your interview quotes. And if you have more than one interview, make sure you make it very clear who is saying what. So you don't want the reader to ever ask, wait, which interviewee is this? Remember to remove yourself. Don't include your questions. You want to seem like you're an invisible observer, kind of like the Invisible Man, which is the picture shown here if you're not familiar with this wonderful classic movie. You're an invisible observer, and so you should never really be able to appear within a story. Since the interview assignment involves you transcribing your interview, I wanted to make a few notes about how to transcribe. A transcription of an interview is the verbatim of that interview. It's word for word what was said between the two speakers. So you're going to want to include yourself. I suggest you put reporter colon and then, do the dialogue of what you asked, and then put the interviewee's name in the next part. And continue that way. So you're going to want to identify the speaker by name, including their title. So if you're, interviewing one of your peers, you might want to put the year that they are in school, like sophomore or junior, something like that. You should be able to copy and paste from the transcript directly into your story. That's really the purpose of a transcript, so that you see everything that was said and then you're just able to copy and paste. So make sure you're taking out excessive fillers like and things of that nature. As you go, you may even want to highlight good quotes that you want to include in your story. It might help save you some time. You might want to put time codes or timestamps like you see in the example to the right for broadcast transcripts. That's not going to be necessary for this assignment, but you could do it for practice if you want. So to add a time code, you just look at what time is either on your recording device or what time is on your recording tape, and you place it within the transcript, so that if I'm looking at this transcript, I know the interviewer says, yeah, well, if they're against your project, then it's going to be difficult. I just have to fast forward to 1 minute into the interview to know where that was said. This does take a long time. I will say the transcripts are very time consuming, so give yourself enough time to work on it. It's why I introduced this on Monday, so that you'll have plenty of time to transcribe your interview by Friday. So up next this week, you will have a discussion post today on conducting interviews. You also have homework from your workbook on picking quotes. And you will need to go over how AP Style uses quotation marks by Wednesday. But this is the only this is the only lesson for the rest of the week. So instead of listening to lecture for the rest of the week, Wednesday and Friday, I want you to conduct your peer interview and do the transcript by Friday. And then you're going to draft your peer interview story, which will be due Monday at midnight. So be working on those things. I'm giving you the class time to be able to do that. But you do have 2 AP review lessons that will help prepare you for the AP exam, which will take place on October 14th. So that's kind of what we have going on this week. We have a lot less due, which I know you guys are hopefully thankful for. But this is when we're really breaking away from the individual exercise assignments, and you're going to be starting to work on the larger projects that involve storytelling. If you have any questions about this, feel free to contact me. Hope you guys have a wonderful week.